Is justice just control? Plato's provocative warning: we've all been told that justice is a virtue. B, that it's the foundation of a good society. B, that it's what we should fight for, vote for, and build systems to protect. But what if we've misunderstood what justice really is? What if, beneath its gleaming surface, justice is not always about fairness or goodness, but about control? Plato, over 2,000 years ago, warned us about this exact possibility. He didn't scream it, he whispered it through allegory, dialogue, and paradox. And today, that whisper has become a siren. Because in a world obsessed with laws, order, and moral certainty, we rarely stop to ask, is justice still justice if it's used to control the soul? Let's start with a basic idea. Plato, in the Republic, sets up an entire city not because he's interested in city planning, but because he wants to understand the soul. He claims that by observing how justice works in a city, we can understand how it functions within us. But the city he builds is strange. It's ruled by philosopher kings. It censors poetry. It divides people into classes based on a noble lie. And yet, he calls this city just. Why? Because in Plato's mind, justice is not about freedom. It's about harmony, each part doing what it's supposed to do without interfering with the others. In the city, that means rulers rule, soldiers protect, and workers produce. In the soul, it means reason governs, spirit supports, and desire obeys. But here's the twist. In both cases, justice is defined by structure and control. There's no room for chaos, no tolerance for rebellion. Everything is ordered, precise, and purposeful. Even lies are permitted so long as they serve the greater good. So we must ask, is this really justice? Or is it just a sophisticated form of control dressed in the language of virtue? Think about our modern world. We live under layers of rules, systems, and institutions all claiming to uphold justice. But when we look closely, we see something eerily similar to Plato's city. We see surveillance in the name of safety, censorship in the name of morality, obedience in the name of peace. We're told what to say, how to act, what to think, all for the sake of a just society. But who decides what justice means? Who defines what is good? And what happens when justice becomes a tool for maintaining power rather than uncovering truth?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
This is where Plato's warning becomes deeply relevant. He wasn't just proposing a political theory. He was giving us a philosophical riddle. Can justice exist without freedom? And if not, then any system that suppresses the individual for the sake of order might be unjust at its core, even if it looks stable on the surface. Let's make it personal. Think about your own life. How often do you silence parts of yourself, your desires, your doubts, your dreams, because they don't fit into the structure you've been told is right? Maybe you work a job that drains you because it's responsible. Maybe you suppress your creativity because it's not practical. Maybe you follow rules you don't believe in because you've been told that's what good people do. But is that inner peace or inner control? Plato would say that justice inside the soul means reason should rule. But what happens when reason becomes a tyrant? When logic chokes emotion? When discipline suffocates spontaneity? The same question applies outwardly. What happens when a society becomes so obsessed with order that it forgets what it's for? When laws become more important than lives? When morality becomes a weapon rather than a guide? Now here's the deeper question. If a system gives you peace but takes your freedom, is it just? Or is it just efficient? Plato's city works, but only if you accept the premise that harmony is more important than liberty, that control is more valuable than choice, that the soul, like the city, must be ruled from the top down. But what if Plato wasn't endorsing this? What if he was warning us? The irony of the Republic is that it reads like a blueprint, but it feels like a dystopia. The philosopher King sounds wise but also disturbingly authoritarian. The city is calm but eerily cold. Could it be that Plato was showing us what happens when justice is reduced to control, not to celebrate it, but to challenge us? Ask yourself, what kind of justice do you believe in? The kind that brings order at any cost? Or the kind that makes room for chaos, for growth, for human messiness? Is true justice about conformity or freedom? About obedience or understanding? In the next part, we're going to explore how Plato's Allegory of the Cave reveals the darker side of justice as a system that keeps people in the dark under the illusion of light. And we'll examine whether our modern systems are really leading us out of the cave or just building nicer prisons inside it. The cave of control, how justice can keep us blind. Imagine being born in a cave. You've never seen the outside world. You're chained, facing a wall, and all you can see are shadows, shapes cast by a fire behind you, manipulated by puppeteers you cannot see. These shadows are your reality. You name them, you believe in them, you build your understanding of the world around them. And then, one day, someone breaks free and sees the fire. Then the cave. Then the world beyond. At first he's blinded. Then he's amazed. But when he returns to the cave to tell the others, they don't believe him. In fact, they hate him. They threaten him. They'd kill him if they could. This is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And at first glance, it feels like a simple metaphor for ignorance. But if we look deeper, if we read it through the lens of our question, is justice just control? Something startling emerges. The cave isn't just ignorance. It's a system, a designed world. A place where reality is managed by shadows, where perception is manipulated by those who control the fire, and where the populace are taught to mistake illusion for truth. It's not just a cave, it's a prison disguised as justice. Now ask yourself, what is the modern equivalent of that cave? Is it our media, our education systems, our political ideologies, our social norms? Plato doesn't explicitly name the puppeteers, but the implication is clear. Someone benefits from the illusion. Someone benefits from the chains. And justice, as it's practiced in the cave, is not about freeing people, it's about keeping them comfortable in captivity. Let's take that in. What if justice, in many of its current forms, is not about truth but about stability? Not about liberation but about management? Not about helping the soul ascend, but about keeping the citizens quiet? The cave is orderly. It makes sense. It feels safe. People know their place. But it's a lie. A system built on control, masquerading as reality. And it begs the question, are we still in the cave? Before we answer that, let's consider something uncomfortable. The man who escapes the cave doesn't just discover the truth, he becomes dangerous, not because he's violent, but because he disrupts the order. He questions the shadows. He challenges the narrative. And in doing so, he threatens the very thing that the others call justice. That's the key. In Plato's world, and in ours, truth and justice aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they're enemies. This creates a profound philosophical tension. If justice is the structure that holds society together, and truth is the force that can tear it apart, which one do we serve? Most people, whether they admit it or not, choose justice because justice feels safer. It tells you what to do. It gives you rules. It rewards compliance. But truth is wild. Truth doesn't care about your comfort. It doesn't care about your system. It doesn't care about your cave. It just is. And that makes it terrifying. So here's the central problem. If justice becomes too comfortable, too rigid, too obsessed with control, it stops seeking truth. It starts punishing it. It becomes the cave. And anyone who tries to leave or help others leave is labeled a threat and a radical, a criminal, a heretic. How many thinkers, artists, prophets, rebels, and philosophers have been punished not because they were wrong, but because they saw too clearly? Think about how that plays out in our lives. We're told what to believe from a young age. We're taught which truths are acceptable. We're rewarded for repeating them and punished for questioning them. Even our sense of justice is shaped by these shadows. We believe we're just when we fit the mold, when we obey the law, when we follow the rules. But what if the rules themselves are unjust? What if the structure is built not to liberate but to limit? This is Plato's warning, that justice, without the constant pursuit of truth, becomes ideology. The kind ideology, once hardened, becomes tyranny. A tyranny not always of violence, but of ideas, of narratives, and of shadows. A velvet prison that teaches us to love our chains. So ask yourself, what shadows are you still mistaking for truth? What beliefs have you inherited not through reason, but through repetition? What systems do you serve not because they're right, but because they're familiar? And most importantly, are you willing to leave the cave, even if it costs you everything you've ever known? In the next part, we'll explore the terrifying consequences of challenging unjust systems, and why the pursuit of truth often makes us enemies of justice, as it's currently defined, revealing why those who question power are often painted as outlaws, not heroes. And the philosopher as outlaw, why truth is dangerous in a just society. We like to believe that societies honor truth. That if someone speaks with clarity, if they reveal uncomfortable facts or challenge broken systems, they will be celebrated as a hero. But history tells a different story. Again and again, those who speak truth to power are punished, ostracized, imprisoned, exiled, silenced, or worse. And this isn't just a mistake of history. It's a pattern, a feature of systems that call themselves just. Because truth, real truth, is corrosive to structures built on control. Which means the philosopher, the one who seeks truth for its own sake, eventually becomes indistinguishable from the outlaw. Plato knew this better than most. His mentor, Socrates, was executed by the very society that claimed to uphold justice. And why? Not for violence, not for treason, but for asking too many questions. It was for corrupting the youth, for refusing to bow to the gods of the state. In other words, for thinking freely. Socrates didn't wield a sword, he wielded a question. And it terrified the structures around him. Because questions dissolve certainty, and certainty is essential if you want people to obey. This is the paradox. A society claims to value justice, but when that justice is questioned, it reacts not with curiosity but with fear. Why? Because justice, once institutionalized, becomes a narrative or a story, and stories need consistency to survive. When someone disrupts the story when they say, "This law is not fair," or "This truth is inconvenient," or "This tradition is corrupt," they are not seen as reformers. They are seen as threats to order, as enemies of peace, as dangerous. And so, we exile the philosopher. Not always physically, but intellectually. We brand them as idealists, too radical, too abstract, too fringe. We say, "That's not practical," or "That's not how the world works," or "You're being difficult." But what we really mean is, "You're making us uncomfortable," because deep down we know they're right. And we're afraid of what following that truth would cost us. Think about your own experience. Have you ever voiced an unpopular truth? Questioned a norm? Challenged a belief everyone else held sacred? If so, you felt the sting of alienation. You've seen how quickly people will turn on the questioner, not the problem. We don't always want truth. We want peace. We want comfort. And when justice becomes a tool for preserving that comfort, it starts to look less like fairness and more like fear management. This is why, in Plato's vision, the philosopher must be dragged back into the cave. Because they don't want to return. They've seen the light. They know the cost. And they understand something most people don't. Truth and justice are not always on speaking terms. Sometimes, to serve truth, you must betray justice. Or at least, the version of justice that society has accepted. This is not a call for chaos. It's a call for courage. A just society should not fear the philosopher. It should embrace them, celebrate them, create space for doubt, for dissent, for discomfort. But that requires a kind of humility that few systems are willing to accept. But it requires leaders willing to say, "Maybe we're wrong." It requires citizens willing to ask, "Is this fair?" Not just when it affects them, but when it affects anyone. But here's the real danger. When justice becomes too rigid, it turns on its own ideals. It forgets that it was once a rebellion too. Every system of justice began as a challenge to a previous system. Every law that protects us today was once unthinkable. Women voting, slavery abolished, civil rights. All of these were once radical ideas, and the people who fought for them were called criminals, rebels, troublemakers, and philosophers. So today, when we silence voices in the name of justice, we may be silencing the very people who will define justice tomorrow. So ask yourself, what truths are you afraid to speak? What systems do you support, not because they're right, but because they're safe? And when you meet someone who challenges your deepest beliefs, do you listen or do you label them a threat? In the final part, we'll bring it all together and ask the ultimate question: if justice without truth becomes control, then what kind of justice is worth fighting for? And how can we build a society where freedom, truth, and order are not enemies but allies? The justice worth dying for, rebuilding truth without control. If we've come this far together, then we've already walked through the cave, questioned the shadows, seen how justice can be used as control, and understood why truth is often treated like a threat. Now we come to the final, and perhaps the most uncomfortable question: what kind of justice is actually worth dying for? Because anything less than that isn't justice at all. It's performance. It's obedience dressed up in noble language. It's control pretending to be moral. To answer that, we have to reimagine justice from the inside out. Not as a set of rules handed down by authority, but as a living relationship between people, truth and freedom. Justice is not a static code, it's a dynamic process. It's not a courtroom, it's a conversation. It's not about who holds power, but how power is held, and whether it bends toward truth or away from it. The justice worth dying for is one that doesn't fear truth, even when that truth rewrites everything we thought we knew. This kind of justice doesn't begin in institutions. It begins in us, in the way we treat each other, in the courage to listen to people we disagree with, in the humility to say, I might be wrong. It's the justice that grows when we stop trying to control others and start trying to understand them. When we replace punishment with restoration. When we replace conformity with curiosity. When we stop asking, how do we silence the problem? And start asking, what created it? But here's the hard part. This version of justice is slow. It's messy. It doesn't give us easy villains or clean answers. It demands patience. It demands vulnerability. It demands that we give up the fantasy that we can engineer utopia through control. That's what Plato's Republic tried to do, and while it was elegant, it was also inhuman. It forgot that people are not parts of a machine. We're not classes or roles or functions. We're souls, complex, chaotic, changing. And any justice that ignores that becomes a cage. So how do we build something better? Start with yourself. Ask where you've internalized control in the name of goodness. Where you've silenced your own impulses, your own doubts, your own dreams, because they didn't fit. Then ask where you've imposed that same control on others. Where you've confused obedience with respect. Where you've valued order over growth. Then most importantly, ask what might happen if you let go. Let go of certainty. Let go of the need to be right. Let go of the idea that justice is something you enforce rather than something you live. Justice worth dying for is not about punishing the wicked. It's about creating space where the truth can breathe even when it's inconvenient, that even when it's painful, even when it destabilizes everything. That's how revolutions begin. Not with weapons, but with questions. Not with control, but with clarity. Socrates didn't raise an army, he raised awareness. And for that, they made him drink poison. Why? Why? Because he represented a justice deeper than the law, and a justice that couldn't be contained. A justice that asked people not just to follow rules, but to examine their lives. And if justice isn't rooted in that kind of reflection, it's not justice, it's just programming. So I leave you with this. Would you rather live in a society that feels just, or one that is just even if it's uncomfortable? Would you rather be praised for obedience or punished for truth? Would you rather live in the cave or walk into the light even if it blinds you? In the end, Plato didn't give us answers. He gave us warnings, and the choice is still ours. We can cling to the illusion of justice and call it peace, or we can risk everything for something real, something honest, something worth dying for. The real question is, do we have the courage to choose the second path? Because if we do, we won't just escape the cave, we'll finally begin to build a world where justice and truth are not enemies, but allies. Where the philosopher is not an outlaw, but a guide. And where control gives way to something far more powerful, understanding,